is about giving you guys some tips on making sure that technical elements get counted when you're designing programs, when you're competing programs, and just to answer a few questions for people about what is required to get an item counted. We don't have a lot of time, so I've picked a couple of key ones, and I'm going to give you a bit of a rundown on how, as a technical specialist, I look at these things. And then again, Phoenix has got a few ideas on exercises that you might be able to do to help develop particular content items. We've basically tried to pick a couple that are examples of the sorts of things that we deal with every day. So the first subject for today is spins. And I've picked the sit spin because it's in pretty much everybody's program at some point. Even the youngsters are being encouraged to do them as part of mandatory combinations. And I dug out of my archives a document I did way back in 2020 when we were doing some online sessions that was all around this exact same subject, how to get something counted. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Okay, so essentially, whenever you come across a new item that you need to learn how to do, or you're a little bit confused about something, or you just want to go back and double check what the requirements are for any technical element, whether it's free skating, dance, precision, quartets, this is my little path of learning. So I read the requirements, I find the definitions of anything I don't know or I'm a little confused about in the World Skate Glossary, which you'll find in the general rules book. And then I go to the relevant rule book. So tonight we're going to start with spins. So we'll go to the free skating rule book. And then I take all the bits of information that I find and put them together to come up with what I hope is the right answer. Okay, so if we take a look at spins, the rulebook says that it's a series of continuous rotations around an axis, which passes through a portion of the body. So in our old rules in 2020, it said that for a test program, for example, a spin must have at least 3 rotations on the required edge in the required position. And it gives you some examples of spins, and it talks about a traveling spin, which is a spin with which the axis moves, a centered spin, which is the axis being stationary, and then upright, sit, and camel. Now, the key one for what we're doing tonight is to have a look at D, where it says sit spin. A sit spin is one in which the hip is as low as the tracing knee or lower. So think the skating knee. The hip of the skating leg needs to be as low or lower than a skating knee. That's all it needs to be a sit spin. And that's why we can now start seeing a lot of the really cool, difficult variations we're seeing. And when I look at one, all I'm looking at to see if it's a valid sit spin is where is that skating knee in relation to the, the skating hip in relation to the knee. Then when we come down to this section here, now these are from the RollArt rulebook, and they're pretty similar word for word at the moment still. I'm sorry I haven't had a time today to update them, but essentially a spin will be considered accomplished when a skater completes a minimum of 3 rotations for a solo spin and 2 rotations for a combination spin. And those 3 rotations need to be in the correct position. So when you put all that together, for a sit spin to be counted, the skater must be rotating around a stationary axis for at least 3 rotations in a position where the skating hip is equal to or lower than the skating knee. Now that all sounds really simple, and that's the guts of what we're looking for when you see a sit spin being counted. Is that clear to everybody at the moment? Sorry, I'm just trying to get my screen back. Has anybody got any questions about those simple rules? Okay, cool. So when we're looking at sit spins at the moment, the number one reason that they're not getting, there are two primary reasons they're not getting counted. One is the skater's not getting the hip down below the knee. And the other one is the rotating part for 3 revolutions if it's a solo spin, or 2 revolutions if it's a combination spin. We don't start counting till that hip is below the knee. So if a skater spirals down, does 1 revolution at the bottom and spirals up, that's okay if there's a period of time of 2 revolutions in a combination spin, for example, where the hip is in the right position. You don't have to have got all the way to the bottom, because in some of the new difficult variations you can't. Every time we're assessing it, we're looking at that hip in relation to the knee. The other crucial thing is it says a minimum of. So just scratching round to 3 revolutions has a very high chance of not being counted if it's a solo spin. We're looking for it. Ideally, you want the skater doing more than the minimum. Okay? So if you apply that to a camel spin, for example, can anyone give me what they think the key parts are for a camel spin? What do we want to see for a camel spin, for example, to be counted? Anyone got any ideas? Okay, so camel spin, the leg needs to be parallel and level with the skating hip. Okay, so it can be higher than the hip, but it can't be lower than the hip. And when we're looking at the leg, we're looking at the entirety of the leg. So having your foot level with your hip and your knee and that leg, the free leg bent, so the knee's below, almost certainly won't get counted. Okay. A lot of the difficult variations, a lot of people are trying them now, which is really fantastic. The other key thing to remember there is you can still get a base camel spin counted if you're trying a difficult variation. So if you do the difficult variation not too well, but you still meet the requirements for a camel spin, what you'll get is a camel spin without the difficult variation. So if you can maintain the basics there while trying those new positions, it's worth doing. Yep, no, that makes perfect sense. It depends really on how bad the torso position is, but primarily the torso position, it should be level. Slightly below would probably still get called, but would affect the QOE. Significantly below would probably not get called because you would struggle to spin anyway. If you can imagine spinning in a tipped position like that, it would be a struggle. So I would suspect that a bunch of other things would go wrong at the same time. If you're on an international floor, which is what we're trying to emulate when we're in New Zealand, I'd be very much aiming for the torso to be parallel to the floor. Okay. Phoenix, have you got any quick tips for keeping revolutions going? Because that's one of the key things we've got. We've got getting up and down out of the sit spin, or spins and with sit spin, because that's our target one tonight, and keeping the revolutions going.
There we go. Yeah, especially with sit spins, but the same applies for camels. My main point as a coach and as a skater is you want control in the position. So especially with sit spins, what you'll often see is kids will be just training, doing a shoot the duck. But if you watch, especially young ones, they'll kind of fall into the shoot the duck position, and then they can sit there once they're down there. But if you were to get them to hold kind of halfway or most of the way down, they wouldn't be able to. And that's what we want to try and work on, because that way they're going to be able to manipulate the edge and keep the revs going. So off skates, it's much more effective in my experience, and from, I'm not a personal trainer, but from conversations with personal trainers, if you have a box of some kind, and the height will depend on the strength of the skater. So myself, I'd probably have like almost hip height for a box, but for younger ones, you'd probably want no higher than the knee to start with. And you start on top with, oh, I can't demonstrate. On top, so this foot's on the box, this foot's dangling over the edge, and I want to go down as slowly as I possibly can. So I'm bending the knee that's still on the box, and then you just touch the ground, and then you can stand up. If you're pushing off the ground once you get to the bottom, then the box is probably too high. But that's a really good exercise to get the control going down and the strength to come up again, but that way they'll be able to maintain the revs. And camels are kind of similar in that you want to be able to control like levering over your leg rather than just falling into a position or flinging a leg up behind you, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
Makes good sense. While you were talking, it just reminded me of a question that was asked last week about uprights, and I know that a few people were thinking that uprights weren't getting counted while we were at nationals, and I would say probably 75% of uprights actually get counted because they're pretty easy. We don't require the free knee to be in any particular position. All we're really looking for is an edge, and that it's maintained for the required number of revolutions. But one of the big mistakes that was being made right through nationals, particularly in the younger grades, was skaters, maybe it was they were panicking a little bit because it had a rough spin somewhere in their program, but they were repeating spins and they were repeating uprights in the same order. And we did have one young dot who did the same upright combination twice, completely from start to finish. There is a rule in the spin requirements around repeated combinations. So you can't do the same base position and edge in combination in the same order. So if you were to do, for example, left forward outside upright, followed by left back inside upright, followed by right back outside upright, at the end of all your combination spins, that same upright set, you'll actually end up with the first one potentially being counted, but all the other ones being disallowed, even if the rest of the spins are really gorgeous, because you've repeated the combination. And it only takes 2 positions repeated. So if you were to do, another one we saw a skater do a camel, a sit, out of back upright, in a back upright, and then they did a different camel and 2 different camels, and then finished with out of back upright, in a back upright. Second combination had to be discounted because you've got a repeated combination there. If anyone's putting together programs and they've got a query around spin orders and things, you're more than welcome to send me an email. More than happy to look at what you think you want to plan the skater to do and then tell you whether it's got a problem or not. Okay. But anytime,
In that example you just gave, is the whole combination disallowed or just the 2 uprights?
The whole combination. And the reason for that is because of a lot of advanced, senior and junior skaters doing 4 and 5 spin combinations and using the same 2 or 3 spins as the core of everything that they do. It's to force people to do things in different orders. Now, you can use those spins the other way around. That's not a problem. If you finish the combination once without a back upright, in a back upright, and then finish the second combination the other way around, in a back and then out a back, that's perfectly fine. Okay. And it's only base position too. So you can do a camel on one, of those edges and an upright on the other, and then do upright, upright, and that's still okay. Those are not repeated. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So that's my free skating example, because spins are probably the main technical element where we're getting things wholly not counted. I can see already we're potentially going to run out of time tonight, so we might pinch a bit of next week's session if anyone thinks of anything else, or we might go and touch on jumps, for example, because there's a few things about jumps that would be useful to pass on as well. But the other one for tonight that is a main thing for us is key points in dance, because it seems to be, I hear a lot of people who think I've got a magic book somewhere that no one else is allowed to see that tells you what the key points are in the dances, and that's completely wrong. I'm working from the same rule book everybody else is. So I've picked the Skaters March because I did a little diagram back when I first did this presentation to try and illustrate something. Now, if anybody who's done the academy sessions this year for dance will remember seeing all the dance patterns put up by the academy coaches who are doing it. And if you have a think about the dance patterns, and I'll share my screen again. This is pretty crusty because I did it old school by photocopying and cutting and paste and sellotaping onto the piece of paper. But essentially, if you have a look here with the Skaters March, I've color-coded, and this is what I do with every year when I get the dance book, I've color-coded the 4 key points. So the first one is down here, and it's the cross roll to right forward outside and the cross behind to left forward inside. Now, see the line running through the middle here? That is running right across the short axis of the rink. Now, any step that is a key point that touches either the short axis there, or the long axis, which runs the length of the rink, has to be within the space of about a skate's length, finishing or starting or doing whatever it needs to do on that marker, because it's an axis and it's a mission critical point. If you have a look here, key point 3 is not on an axis line. It's on a roughly 45 degree, maybe not quite 45 degree angle from the center of the rink out to the corner. So that has a little bit more room to move. And we've been sort of told that you can sort of half a meter, maybe as much as a meter, depending on the speed and strength of the skater. You've got quite a bit bigger room for variation going along there, as long as everything else is right. Okay. So what I was trying to show with this diagram here is that some things are always in the same place. So key point 1 and key point 2 in this dance finish and start on the long axis. So that's mission critical. But key point 3 and 4 can move their position depending on the speed of the skater. Okay, they can be quite a bit further, like this one's quite a bit further away from the long axis because it's a much bigger lobe. Hope that makes sense. Now, the thing I keep trying to say to people is key points are the what, the where, the when, and the how. So we'll go back to this very first key point here, which is cross roll to right forward outside for 2 beats and a cross behind to left forward inside for 2 beats. And if you have a look, you've got to worry about it being 2 beats and 2 beats. You've got to worry about doing a correct cross roll. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be correct. So you've got to think about how you do that cross roll. You've got to do a cross behind. So if you were needing to check this right back to the glossary, if you look at a cross behind, it tells you that it's got to cross in, and it's got to be toe wheels level with, at least level with the heel wheels when you're tucking it in. So there's all sorts of things like that. But the critical thing is it's got to finish. You've got to take that next step pretty much bang on the short axis. Then when you have a look at the next key point, which is the swing, it's got to start there. And this is the cunning bit. Have a look at the line from where the key point starts, the first key point starts, and the second key point finishes. You'll notice they're actually on a line. So that's key baseline for the dance. So one of the number one things I see happen with young skaters with this dance is that they'll do this second key point really nicely, but it actually finishes, they do it way too sharp, and it finishes right out maybe, another half a meter or more beyond the imaginary line they created when they started that first key point. Okay, so when I'm looking at the cross in front, which is, let me go back to the swing for a second. The other thing is that the swing says the free leg swings on the third beat of the step without deviation from the edge. So if they swing on beat 2, I can't give the key point. If they swing on beat 4, I can't give the key point. If they do a really lovely outside edge all the way to beat 3.5 and then rock over to an inside edge, I can't give the key point. Okay, now when you get into more complicated dances, and I've just been studying the Midnight Blues, there's some really crazy stuff in there, and you've got to work out on the floor where they need to be. So if you're working with a skater doing a much more complicated dance than the Skater's March, I'd recommend putting some marker points out on the floor. Mark somehow, if you've got at Nelson Rink, we used to have the Whalers hockey sign was right on the long axis as you went along the short end of the rink. If find some marker points and work out the lines that you need these key points to be on, and then develop the speed of the skater to fit the pattern of best fit for them around the whole dance. It's no good if they go crazy fast at the beginning and do a really, really beautiful big lobe on the first corner, but then they've set themselves up with some horrific baselines if they slow down too much. Okay, so you want to get a size pattern starting at the middle, work it out and grow it out to the size of best fit for the skater. Okay, some of the simple dances at the moment, even things like skaters, the march sequence, there's 8 runs across the top. So what you need to do is set a target for whoever you're teaching that one to, that they've got to do 4 runs beforehand, 4 runs afterwards, things like that. Okay. Ooh. Yeah. Sorry, there's a Lance, Nikki, is something disappeared? I did stop showing the pattern because I wanted to come back and see the screen. Okay. In terms of key points, so that's the where. The when is timing, and we see a lot of key points. It's timing things like swings not being swung on the right bit, steps being held a bit too long or a bit too short. We've had some completely different lengths of steps being done. So that's your when. In terms of the timing, the how is a judge thing. So provided you've done the what correct, like you've done a cross roll, not a cross in front, or you've done a 3-turn, not a bracket, the how you did it is the QOEs. So how well you did it is the QOEs. So provided you've done, if it says do a 3-turn, provided you've done a 3-turn, then it's all good on the technical side. If you do a very wobbly 3-turn, chances are the QOEs won't be so good for the dance as a whole, because the judges are assessing QOEs across the whole pattern. That's kind of a real quick and dirty version of the key points. Does everybody kind of get that? Has anyone want to ask any quick questions about those key points? How to assess key points or work out what you need to do?
I have a question actually.
Sure.
So like for a tech specialist, if you're looking at like a counter in the dance, for example,
Yep.
are you looking more at where it is on the floor, like key point 1 in the senior dance to key point 2? Because you say the QOE, the judges mark the like strongness of the edge, or if it was rocky or not.
Yeah.
How do you call a counter for it?
When I'm looking at the counter in the rhythm roll, I'm looking, do you stay on the correct edge right up to the counter? I don't particularly mind if it's shallow or deep, because that's not part of what I'm doing as a technical specialist, as long as it's correct and ends up so that you're doing the turn in the correct place, that the turn has cusp and is not jumped, and then that it comes out on the correct edge. So in your grade, as a general rule with that counter, the number one fault is people actually completely change edge for quite a while before they actually do the turn. So what they've done is they've done the edge, then a change of edge, then a 3-turn, rather than doing a counter. So yeah, in terms of counters and rockers, which the big thing is making sure that the correct edge on the way in and the correct edge on the way out, because they excuse me, yeah, and that you have it turning like that turns a real. Sorry, what was that, Lee?
Oh no, nothing, sorry.
It's okay. So the other key thing for any of those turns is the angle that you're doing it on. So for example, again, if we take that counter, if you don't come round enough, then it won't be done on the correct direction. Okay, some turns, and that's another thing to bear in mind, if they say that you've got to do it on that angle across the floor, then that's the angle we want to see it on. If it says it's got to be done on the short axis aiming to the other side, then that's the angle we want to see it done on. Okay, and depth of edge will affect that a little bit. But yeah, does that answer your question, Aspen?
It does, thank you.
No worries. Anyone else got any questions about key points? I know it's a bit to think about, and you kind of just want to go back and stand in. That's actually another really good thing. You will notice possibly, if you pay attention to what myself or Karen or any other dance technical panel person does, when I get to a floor, if I don't know the floor particularly well, you'll see me wander around it. And what I'm doing is I'm walking at my pace, the length of the floor, to work out where the short axis is and where the long axis is. Now, I don't care what lines are on the floor. I don't care where the girders are. I don't care where the seating is. I'm worried about, based on the mapped out skating surface for that floor, where are my middles? Okay. And it's really important to get those right. And I would highly advise any skater or coach, when you get to a venue that you're not comfortable with, not familiar with, that you do that process. Okay. Pascal Street, the Manawatu venue, is a really good case in point, because it has a roof beam across at about 3/4 the length of the floor, and many young skaters feel like that's the wall, and if you watch them, they won't skate past that wall. And so they shift their entire pattern down the floor. And because they do that, they get no key points. They could be doing the best steps ever, but they can be up to a meter the wrong side of the midline. Another good one, if you think about the skater's march that I showed you, it has its middles evenly opposite each other, right? the number of times I've seen skaters do that, you can't give anything on one of those midlines if it's not opposite each other, right? So it's real simple in terms of the geometry. You just got to find your target lines and work to those. Okay. Phoenix, anything you want to add? I know I kind of stole your how to map it out on the rink bit, but
No, I think that's good. Yeah, I think just as a coach, especially for the younger skaters, it's really important that you take the time to allow them to understand the whole picture of the dance. So show them the patterns. They might not understand all the intricacies of it, but let them see it, so that they understand what they're aiming to do. Because from there, you can give them the sort of the reference points. And this is like today, we're going to use something against the wall to mark short axis, or we'll use the line on the floor, or we might make the track with some cones. But often if that's their only reference point and they just know I always do the swing on the blue line, they don't understand that that's halfway and how that fits in with the dance. Then if they move to another floor, they have no idea how to adjust. So yeah, I think just stress taking the time, because as a skater, it's what I've always appreciated as well, taking the time to let the skaters understand the full picture. And I think also as a coach, understanding that the full picture, like the dance is designed as the whole dance. So if you're thinking of the key points and everything, if the pattern's not in the place that it's been mapped out to be, then you're not going to be able to do the key point, because like, I don't know, like across in front, for example, if it's not where it's supposed to be, then you're not going to be going in the correct direction afterwards, and you're not going to be on the correct edge per se. Like somewhere you're going to have to compensate, which means somewhere it's going to deviate and potentially cost you. So just, yeah, full picture, and don't hone in on one thing if it's going to throw out everything else, because that way it's probably not going to count in the first place, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay, I've got one last little bit I want to pop out there, because I was looking at some stuff as part of my studies for my next exam, and it reminded me clusters. We had a couple of clusters at nationals that the turns were fine, but it was some of the other rules around the cluster that actually meant a perfectly good cluster didn't get counted, or it might have only got a base level when it could have got a level 1 or a level 2. So when you go back after tonight, if you're involved with dance, and it actually applies to free skating footwork sequences as well, but only for the one side. But a cluster has to follow edge to edge to edge for the first 3 turns. Okay, so if your cluster, say for example, free skating, you do a left forward outside 3 turn, it finishes on a left back inside edge. The next turn you have to do, or the next turn you do, must start on that left back inside edge. So it might be that you then do a left back inside rocker, and that will finish on a forward inside edge, and then you've got to do the next turn from that forward inside edge, so it could be a bracket. Okay, now we had a number of skaters, both in dance and in free skating, who changed edge quite significantly when they were trying body movements or something in the middle of those first 3 steps. So they might have done the left forward outside 3 turn and the rocker okay, but then they tried to do a leg kick or something, and it changed the edge from the forward inside to an outside, and then they did their turn on that changed edge. The moment they changed edge, no cluster. Okay, the other thing is when you're doing clusters in dance, so you've got 2 sets of 3, remember there's a limit on how many travelings you can do and 3 turns you can do. So we had a bunch of kids who missed out on even base level clusters, because they actually did 2 3 turns one in each set. So if you only do 3 turns in each set, and 2 of them are 3 turns, then the second set only has 2 turns in it, because we can't count the second 3 turn. So you can't even get a level base. Does that make sense? It's weird, but the whole point was we had skaters basically doing clusters that were full of travellings and 3 turns, and what we want to do is encourage skaters to learn the more difficult edges. So just be very careful that as a skater that you're staying on the edge you're planning to do, and coaches, just make sure that you are double checking that you only have 1 3-turn in a cluster and 1 travelling in a cluster, and that your skater is not accidentally changing edge when they do body movements. Pick body movements that they can do that will stay on the correct edge. Is that clear? Because that was a biggie. I was quite sad. There was a couple of really nice clusters and I couldn't give them. Yeah. Okay. Any other quick questions for tonight before we wrap it up? God, I'm surprised how fast 30 minutes goes.
Can I just ask one question, sort of going back to the start with the combination spins?
Yep.
How many times are you allowed to change feet in the same combo? Because I'm just thinking, like, say you've got a 3 upright combo and then you've got a sit spin to 2 uprights, but you want to do different uprights. How often can you change?
You can change feet as many times as you like, provided that each one is a reasonable change. The only time there's a problem with changing feet is sometimes you see a skater and they're busy spinning on that foot, and then they put that one down and then they step back on that foot. That's an instant broken combination. Okay, but you can go that foot to that foot to that foot to that foot if you want.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Just be aware of the broken combination rules around, like I saw a couple of really cool attempts at stepping onto left forward outside sit, but as they did it, they pushed way past their original axis, so they essentially started a new spin. So just be aware that when you change foot, you can't push away from the point of rotation where you are. The idea, you're allowed a little bit because it's physically impossible to put your feet down in the same spot. But what we're looking for is where a skater actually puts the new foot on the ground and pushes onto it and away from where they were skating, the original part of the spin. So as long as it can be nice and neat and maintain the speed, there are no limitations on how many times you change feet.
Thank you.
No worries. And as I've said before, if you've got any questions like that, I can't answer, I did this at my last competition. Why didn't it get counted? Because I often don't remember. By the time I've done 14 hours, 3 days in a row, there is absolutely zero chance of me remembering what somebody did at the beginning of day one. But also there's an ethics rule around that. But you can, and you are more than welcome to send myself or Phoenix or any one of the team a question that says, I'd like to try this. Is it okay? Absolutely happy to give you a feedback based on the rules as to whether there's any problems with it. Okay. And just remember that we're recording these sessions. So if you missed last week's or whatever, or you want to go back and listen to anything, they're being uploaded. Sorry, it's on the Artistic Committee site, isn't it, Jenny?
Yes, it's on the Artistic Committee website.
Cool. And yeah, there's so many things I wanted to carry on saying. I think next week was supposed to be QOEs, but I think we'll pick up a bit more of technical stuff and just add a bit more QOE information to it. So fire any questions in if there's anything that you want me to or want us to specifically answer next week. Okay, but yeah, have a great week, everyone.